This is BBC News. I'm Samantha Simmons. The headlines. 28 premature babies evacuated from Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital have arrived in Egypt. Tanks surround the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza. Hamas says airstrikes there have killed 12 people. Fighting continues to rage in northern Gaza as hopes grow that a deal can be reached for the release of hostages. Singer Shakira settles a Spanish tax court case, agreeing to pay a €7.5 million fine. And we speak to some of the estimated 170,000 Russians living in legal limbo in Ukraine. Hopes are growing that some of the Israeli hostages seized by Hamas last month could soon be freed. Qatar, which is mediating between Israel and Hamas, said only very minor obstacles were in the way of an agreement. It's thought the deal will also involve the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails and a brief cessation of fighting. Well, the Israeli military says that 239 people are being held hostage. So far, 4 hostages have been released and another has been freed by Israeli forces. Well, let's get more on this and talk to Mark Regev, who is an advisor, senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Welcome to you, Mr. Regev. Thank you very much for being with us. What can you tell us about the hostage negotiations? How confident are you that a deal is in the offing? Certainly the messaging we're hearing from Israel, from Qatar in the past 24 hours or so seems increasingly hopeful.
Well, I hope we see a hostage release. They've been held now for, 44 days. And out of those people held, some 240, there are 32 children, including, as you know, a baby of 10 months old. He was 9 months when he was kidnapped, but he's now 10 months old. There are also young toddlers, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. This is a crime against humanity, and they have to release everyone.
Would you say that Israel is the closest it's been to a deal?
You know, it's a bit... you're not there until you're there. And so we'd like to see the release of our people, and until it's done, it's not done. And we know who we're dealing with. We're dealing with a brutal, horrific terrorist organization capable of the most gruesome violence. We've seen that in their behavior.
Would a deal involve what's being talked about, a possible 5-day pause in fighting to allow more humanitarian aid in? Would it mean the release of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails? What are you looking at? What's on the table?
So I can't go into the details under discussion because that's not conducive to getting a positive result. I can say this. The reason people are a bit more upbeat, though once again, we're not there yet, is because Hamas needs a ceasefire. We've been hitting them hard and they want to have time to rest and regroup. And we've been hitting them hard, and we've said we'll only agree to a temporary ceasefire in the Gaza Strip if there is a release of our hostages. And so that is our pressure on them. And we think as we ratchet up that pressure, that will increase the chances, though not guarantee, but it increases the chances of a release of hostages.
How much pressure is Benjamin Netanyahu under from the Israeli people to agree a deal, and also from within his own government, where we understand that some far-right members of that government are actually also asking for the death penalty to be reintroduced in Israel for those who were captured, those behind the Hamas attack on October the 7th, which is, we understand, causing deep divisions and rift within the government and within Israeli society?
So our military operation has 3 goals. One is, of course, to dismantle Hamas's military machine and remove them from power in Gaza so they can never again commit the sort of massacre that they did of our people on October 7th. Number 2 is, of course, to release the hostages. We want to see them all home with their families. They should never have been abducted in the first place. And number 3 is to create a new reality in Gaza whereby we won't be living next to a terror enclave, and that there'll have to be peaceful and stable relations between Israel and Gaza. Hostage release is an integral part of our war aims, and it's up there. It's a high priority. It's the highest priority.
But the deal has to be agreed within the Israeli government, doesn't it, which is a coalition government. And Benjamin Netanyahu needs everybody around that table, or a consensus at least, to agree. How serious are the rifts going forward to try and secure the release of these hostages and make a deal that works?
We are a democratic country, and you need cabinet approval. That is clear. My expectation is if the Prime Minister and the inner war cabinet reach a deal, I believe there is a very, very good chance, even more so, that the entire government will support that. Of course, there could be different ideas within the cabinet. We're a democracy, as I said. But I believe if the Prime Minister and the war cabinet can agree to an arrangement that brings our people home, then that will get a majority in the cabinet. But once again, we're a democracy. We'll have to take every step as it comes.
Israel Defense Forces have released this footage that it says is of these tunnels that prove Hamas, in their view, have this control command center under the Al-Shifa hospital, which has been the focus of IDF operations for the past few days, for a week or so. Do you think that your key allies and others are now convinced of your case, given the evidence that you say you've released?
Our key allies were convinced all along. The Americans, first and foremost, they released a statement already last week saying that their own intelligence corroborates Israel's, that the Hamas has a military machine, its command and control underneath the Al-Shifa hospital. Now I think these photos, even the most skeptical will have to agree that, yes, Hamas has brutalized this hospital, using it as a human shield, using all the patients and medical staff in the hospital as a human shield for its war machine. And I think there's a question here for many who have doubted Israel's claims, or those who have parroted the Hamas position. There's no military Hamas presence in the hospital, including from the international humanitarian organizations. They all have to now look in the mirror and say, why did you dismiss Israel's claims all along? We knew what we were talking about.
You say that you had already convinced your allies. They released their own intelligence. The US says its intelligence, in fact, suggests the presence of a command and control node. I don't know whether you would agree that the suggestion there, the implication being that perhaps what you found isn't as central as a command and control center under that hospital as Israel would suggest.
No, I think the Americans and the Israelis see eye to eye. We don't have a problem there. But if people are remaining skeptical, and there are some people we'll never convince, yes, Hamas will continue to deny it, I'm sure. But I think in the coming days, as we will be able to release even more and more documentary proof, and hopefully we'll be able to have BBC camera down there in the shafts as well in the coming days. I mean, when Hamas says, yes, that they never had a military machine under our hospital, it's like them saying we never killed innocent civilians on October 7th. And it's like them saying all the other lies they've said. Okay. We don't target Israeli civilians. This is Hamas. This is a terrorist organization. And I urge everyone, we have to treat everything that they say with the skepticism and that it deserves.
Let me ask you about reports of Israeli tanks in and around the Indonesian hospital in Gaza, with reports that a dozen or so people have been killed there. Can you tell us about the Israeli operations there? What is happening?
So I'm not at liberty to talk about ongoing operations. I would suggest that the skepticism about the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health there in Gaza, that you remain skeptical. And when they say there's a certain amount of casualties, you take that with a grain of salt. That Hamas has used other hospitals to shelter its military machine is, of course, documented. We saw that at the Rantisi hospital.
The IDF have been criticised by the UN Secretary General in the past day or so, following reported attacks on 2 UN schools housing civilians. What can you tell us about those schools and what happened there?
It's still a war zone. That's in the Jabalia area, and there's ongoing fighting. We've taken casualties there.
But schools should be protected, shouldn't they?
Correct, as hospitals should be. But what do you do when Hamas is using them as part of its war machine? And here we have documented consistently how Hamas uses humanitarian sites like schools, like hospitals, like mosques. They use them, and civilian dwellings, to shield their war machine. And they're actually firing out of these places. They fire out of hospitals. They fire out of schools. So we don't want to see any people caught up in the crossfire between us and Hamas. And in the particular case that you mentioned in your question, it's still not clear. There was a firefight between Israeli soldiers and Hamas terrorists. We still don't know what was the fire that brought about the destruction inside the school. It's still not clear. Of course, Hamas says it's Israel, but that's their automatic pilot. Of course they say that.
Prime Minister,
I urge the media to be skeptical.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that it is trying to minimise, the IDF are trying to minimise civilian casualties in the war in Gaza. They haven't been successful.
We empower those who act.
Those casualties as this operation continues, what should they be doing?
Well, the first thing we've been doing all along is urging civilians to leave combat zones. And we've been doing that from day one. And thank goodness you've had most Gazan civilians have heeded our advice and have left these areas.
Yeah, 1.7 million people are now displaced. The IDF have signed off plans to extend the offensive within Gaza ahead of a widely anticipated push south. Where is safe for people to go in Gaza?
West of the city of Khan Yunis. We're being very specific about it. And the people of Gaza know. Now, I'm the son of a refugee. I know it's not easy to be dislocated in war from one place to another but surely the difficulties in movement are preferable to being caught up in crossfire between Israel and the Hamas.
It's not just difficulties in movements, though. It's where are all these people to go? 1.7 million people in an area, 26 miles long, Gaza, with very few facilities now. People are starving, running out of water, under dire humanitarian conditions. Where are they supposed to go? Who's supposed to house them? How are they supposed to have food, water, access to medical facilities?
So we have specified areas which we believe there won't be combat, which are safer places to be. It's west of the city of Khan Yunis. We've called upon the international aid organizations, the UN, to establish their city of tents.
But they don't have enough aid. They can't get their aid in.
There is the aid. The aid is coming in. We've got over 100 trucks coming in every day from the Rafah crossing, which is right by this area. We can expedite that. There can be more aid coming in.
So you will allow more aid in. And as you know, the UN agencies are saying it needs to be far more than 100 trucks a day, which was far less than came in before the war.
We're quite willing to expedite. We're even talking about doubling the current amount of aid going in. We want to see a massive humanitarian effort to support the Gazan civilian population.
When is that going to happen? Can you give us a time frame?
We think it should be happening now. It should be happening now. What's happening is as the people move to this area west of the city of Khan Yunis, it's close to the crossing between Egypt and Gaza, sorry. It's close to where the aid is coming in. We've made no limitation whatsoever on the amount of food or medicine or water that comes in. We believe you can create a humanitarian zone there which can look after tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who've been temporarily displaced because of the fighting.
There's 1.7 million people being displaced.
So we'll have to do our best to deal with them all. This is a war. It's a war we didn't want. It's a war that was forced upon us. But we have to defeat Hamas. We have to destroy Hamas. Why? Because they say openly, if they stay in power, if they stay ruling the Gaza Strip, they will continue to launch the sort of attacks that we saw on October 7th. They say so openly. They say so openly. Hamas has said, given the opportunity, they would do October 7th again and again and again. This is a genocidal terrorist organization. We have to defeat them to protect our people and ultimately to bring a better future for the people of Gaza who deserve better than this terrorist regime.
OK, lastly, Mr. Regev, let me ask you about the number of people killed. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry say that total is now 13,000 killed in the past 6 weeks in Gaza. I know Israel disputes those numbers and says there isn't independent verification. Correct. How many people do you think have been killed? What proportion is militants? What proportion women and children?
So let's be clear. It's not just we question the numbers that Hamas has put out, but Hamas would have you believe that they are all innocent civilians. Yes, that's what Hamas would tell you. And we believe a large proportion of them are in fact Hamas fighters, that we've been successful in hitting the Hamas machine. And we believe, and we'll have precise numbers when this is over, but when you compare our ratios of civilian to combat deaths to other comparable situations like the fighting against ISIS in Iraq and in Syria, I think the Israeli Defense Forces will come out very positively by comparison.
Even when we're looking at numbers that Hamas says are 4,500 children, a significant proportion of those killed are children.
But as you yourself said, Hamas says, and we take everything Hamas says, and you should too, if you don't mind me saying, with a grain of salt. This is a terrorist organization that has no compulsion about killing innocent people, and they've got no compulsion about killing the truth either. OK, Mark Regev, thank you very much for being with us from Tel Aviv. My pleasure.